From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. From the latest BCI Cattle Chat podcast, K-State veterinarians Bob Larson and Brad White, cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber, and agricultural economist Dustin Pendell discuss the importance of having regular conversations with your lender, as well as offering some strategies for making that conversation easier. Northeast Area Extension agronomist Stu Duncan, who participates in bi-weekly crop updates with agents and specialists from across the state, reports on their findings and takes a look at some options for dealing with a potentially dry winter and spring. And Gus Vanderhoeven stops by with this week's Stop, Look, and Listen. It's all just ahead on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Thanks for joining us. Up next, the latest from the weekly Cattle Chat podcast out of the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University. Among the topics covered by veterinarians Bob Larson and Brad White, cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber, and agricultural economist Dustin Pendell is how to have a conversation with your lender. Something they point out is typically a lot scarier to think about than to actually do.
There are some folks that I know are good for me that I don't necessarily like to go visit. And not to specifically call out anyone. I like our dentist, but going to the dentist is not a fun thing that I look forward to, even though it's something that I should do and do more frequently. You guys have people like that. And so what I do, here's the thing, I put it off, right? Mm-hmm. I continue to put it off. And it turns out that does not make it better. That doesn't make it just, well, on a variety of fronts, right? It doesn't make it better. But what we're going to talk about, and Bob, you've been doing a project, we want to talk about building some of those long-term relationships, but not just going to visit when you need to. And we're going to talk about lenders, right? There are several areas in your business that you need to do some of those things. And I know, Weber, you've just done some of this, right?
Yeah, so I was actually taking just a deposit into the bank, and I noticed that our lobby was open. I'm a big fan of the mobile app, make deposits, and but I was driving by and I noticed a bunch of cars parked in the lobby. So I'm just going to whip in and do this in person. And while I was there, I did stop. I was sitting in waiting for one of the service folks to help me, sitting in the lobby. And president of the bank's a local guy that has some ag interests, came out and we chit-chatted about cattle market and so forth for a while. And when we were done, I made sure to go by and see my loan officer, got our house financed there and several other things. And so just check in, say hi, see how things are going, kind of update him on what's going on at our place, and just relationship building, if nothing else. So I didn't have anything I needed. I just wanted to say hi and sort of touch base and make sure that they knew we were still alive, and everything was going well.
And Dustin, you think that's stuff that's the big thing, right? Be proactive in building some of those relationships.
Absolutely. I mean, best time to be. You want to be proactive with your lenders. You want to build those relationships up, especially during the good times, because when times turn, which they will, that's not when you want to start trying to build those relationships when you're in a financial hard spot. And so open lines of communication, constantly visiting, talking with them. They're an advocate for you. So you got plans, take them in. Get some honest input from them. Let them see what you're thinking. Let them learn who you are. Let them learn about your operation. Let them learn about your philosophy, your operation, your farming philosophy. And yeah, those open lines of communication, that relationship building is, in my opinion, one of the most important things.
Because no two ranches and no two ranchers are the same. And Bob, I know that's one of the things that you talked about is different levels of risk tolerance, different levels of plans on how we're going to make this thing work. What have you found out as you've kind of looked into this topic?
Well, we're working on a project where we're looking at working with some producers, looking at and making some expansion or some changes in their operation, and it's going to take capital, right? And one of the pushbacks is, I don't know if my lender will go for this. And it's kind of that avoidance of the hard conversation. And so we kind of said, well, we'll go talk to the lenders and see what they're thinking. And the lenders were actually much more open and not as quick to say no as I think some of the producers were concerned. And the lenders said, no, we want to hear your plans. Because again, think about their business. They want to loan money. They want you to succeed long term. And they actually want to have some of these conversations. But it's like a lot of hard conversations that we have in life is sometimes the fear of the conversation is much worse than the actual conversation. And sometimes the feedback might be negative, but honestly, it doesn't sting as much as we were afraid it was going to sting. That the banker actually still wants to loan me money. They just want to understand more about my plan, or they want me to consider another factor that may reduce the risk or change it. So it could be a back and forth conversation in that, yeah, it's true that if I just go in and ask for a lot of money from my bank and for them to say yes with no other questions, probably isn't going to happen. But them working with me over several meetings to come up with a really good plan that may be a little bit different than what I came in initially, that might be the outcome of this set of difficult conversations that actually probably weren't nearly as bad as I was concerned about.
But what you said, one thing you said, which I think is really good, is you're creating that, and I'll paraphrase, you're creating that win-win environment. They want to loan you money, but they also want you to be successful. You want to be successful. You need some capital. So to do that, you've got to have some sort of plan for can I just go in there and ask them for money? Or Dustin, do I need to have some sort of plan written out to kind of describe that?
Well, I mean, they probably do like to see a plan of some sort, right? Here's what I want to do. Here's all the prices are this. Maybe if the prices are going to be a little better, or if prices are worse, just have some kind of sensitivity analysis around that. Yeah, I mean, you always want to have a plan in place, and that's, again, you get input from them. They can say, no, you're too high, you're too bullish or too bearish on what your prices, input or output prices are going to be. And again, it's that they want to see you succeed, because if you succeed, then they succeed at the end of the day. And so again, it's be proactive and build those long-term relationships. And what I've heard you guys talk about before on past podcasts of always having this relationship with your veterinarian or your nutritionist or whatever, I don't see it any different here. I think, the ag lender is going to be your strongest advocate on the business side of things. And I think having that relationship with them is important.
Yeah, Dustin, I think you're exactly right. The reality is that, farmers and ranchers are experts at farming and ranching. We're not finance experts. We're not animal nutrition experts. We're not animal health experts. So thinking about, how do you build out a team of trusted advisors for your business? And let's be honest, many even mid-size agricultural enterprises are pretty good sized small businesses, right? And so having somebody that's sitting across the table that's actually on your side and giving you good input about, well, let's restructure part of this lending portfolio into different terms, or, kind of helping manage cash flows, all those sort of things. They're experts at that, right? And having that kind of input can really make your business better and stronger and more profitable ultimately. So having that good relationship with a teammate, and I think that's the right idea, is have them, they're on your team.
And they know, or even negative feedback doesn't mean they don't want you to succeed. And it could be an opening, and I've talked to some as well, that they look at that as, okay, I'm not saying no for all time. I may not like this particular plan, but maybe there's some revisions that could make it work.
Yeah, I think that's important. It's a back and forth conversation. It's not a one-time conversation. And hopefully maybe it's actually unusual that I would come up with a perfect idea that has no flaws. And actually someone else pointing out some areas that I didn't think of is positive. And then we can reformulate and come up with a better plan that because I don't want to I don't want to default, and the bank doesn't want me to default. And so there is real value in a kind of a thick skin and really looking at my idea with someone that's going to give me honest feedback.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you feel like somebody pointing out flaws in your ideas is a positive, because
you've got a couple ideas there.
Well, now we can open it up and really start talking. So we'll do some ideas later, and we'll provide feedback. Just remember, it's a positive, Bob.
I think the other real valuable piece is that, the guy sitting across the desk, the lender or gal, she's had the same conversation likely with 15 other farmers or ranchers. And in that process has probably gotten some perspective and ideas on things that are working for other people, other new strategies that you might deploy. And so, you get the benefit of leaning on their experience too. It's not just your operation, right? They have vision across a whole number of operations that are in their lending portfolio. And that can be a real advantage.
Absolutely. Use their expertise. And that leads us right to our Cattle Chat checklist for this week, which are top strategies to use when talking to your lender.
Number 6, know your tolerance for risk.
Number 5, have a good understanding of your current financial position.
Number 4, create a good arrangement, one that's positive for both you and your lender.
Number 3, don't be afraid to ask for what you want or need.
Number 2, respond to criticism. Feedback isn't always negative.
And number 1, be proactive. Develop a long-term relationship with open lines of communication.
And that's our BCI Cattle Chat checklist for this week.
From the latest Cattle Chat podcast out of the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University, that's veterinarians Bob Larson and Brad White, cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber, and agricultural economist Dustin Pendell with their thoughts on how to have a conversation with your lender. To listen to the full podcast, which also includes first frost, cow culling management, and winter grazing tips, go to ksubci.org. ksubci.org. Agriculture Today continues in a moment. This is the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wickman. K-State research and extension agronomists from across the state have been conducting bi-weekly crop condition updates via Zoom. More than a dozen agents and specialists made reports during last week's update, and according to Northeast Area Extension agronomist Stu Duncan, there were multiple reports about the dry conditions being experienced across the state. Stu, you're continuing to get weekly updates from agents across the state, and what are they seeing in terms of crop conditions?
Jeff, that's a good question, and we just had wrapped one up, but the corn yields have been, for the most part, surprisingly good until you get down in far southeast. They had issues getting corn in a timely fashion, and then when they did, they hit some of that really nasty heat we had in August and July, too, when it was trying to fill. But most of the corn yields have been very good. Some of the irrigated out west has been in 250 bushel and higher. There was a couple of yield contests in northeast Kansas that were well over 200 bushels that I heard about. So the corn has for the most part, been pretty good. I have plots. We have some down at Ottawa at the experiment field, and 166 bushel corn is pretty doggone good corn down there, dry land anyway. The beans have bounced around yield-wise a little bit more, generally pretty doggone good unless they were planted real late. But the maturity group, and of course, again, in the state where you're at, if we had decent rainfall early, everything took off pretty well. The later we planted, we tended to have more shriveled pods or aborted blooms or some actually some abortion in the pods themselves. We'd lose a bean or two when they were trying to fill in those extremely hot, dry conditions. But all in all, they've come along really well. I'm surprised with some of the work we had at Ottawa that there was not that much of a differential in about a 3 to 4 week planting date gap we had, and they were just about the same dry. When beans dry down, they dry down very rapidly. Sorghum harvest has picked up well throughout the state, and of course now most of it's west of the Flint Hills, but the agents that I've talked to, they've experienced some very, very good sorghum yields if it was planted normal planting time for sorghum. And I'm talking there's some going up in the 120 bushel, 130 bushel, or even a little bit higher dry land. It stood pretty well. Had a little bit of trouble right in the central part of the state, seeing some dry weather stalk rots, fusarium and charcoal rot mostly, but in some sorghum starting to go down. But for the most part, it's been standing pretty doggone well. Our three majors, and we're actually even, there's a few modules sitting at the gin at Winfield, and they're starting to strip some cotton further west. Most of that activity's been getting the cotton prepared for harvest. That's what I've seen so far.
Most of the trouble spots then related to the dry conditions later in the year?
Yes, absolutely. And there's kind of some surprising things that you may not notice. And a lot of folks haven't been able to get out and about as much. But I've seen, if wheat got in earlier, it looks a lot better, or at least it's got more growth on it. It does need water. The central part of the state, almost a huge portion of that wheat anymore is planted after a summer crop harvest, whether it's corn or soybeans, and you get into the southeast and it's the same way too. Those fields, if they did emerge, they are looking pretty erratic. Emergence was erratic. And out west, Lucas Haig out at Colby had told me their earlier planted looks pretty doggone good. Anything they're doing now is just dusting in or maybe not even doing it. But central part of the state, we've still got time. I mean, it's about a week after most of the fly-free dates through there, and which means that we're going to start kicking seeding rate up pretty quick. But it is dry. It's going to take rain to get most of that up now, and the ground is very hard. So that's what we're dealing with there. Another part of the dry has been, I've seen a lot of late harvest of some pastures or even some ranch grain that's not necessarily paid that often, but we are looking at some potential hay shortages. We were low a year ago. This year we had a good crop, but ponds have gotten lower. The deep ones are still got plenty of water in them, but I've heard that from all around the state here in the last week or so, that their guys are concerned about not just their water supply, but their feed supply too for the winter. So it's great harvest weather, but not so good for seeding wheat or getting ready for fall.
Well, as we look at fall, are there any changes that producers could make, things that they didn't do last year that they may consider doing this year?
We had a question on that about anhydrous application, and I've got to dig into that a little bit, but a big chunk of our nitrogen application for next spring goes on in the fall as anhydrous ammonia, and we need that reaction changing the NH4 to the ammonium part that converts it into nitrate works much better when there is good soil moisture and we can get a good seal and the temperature's down closer to 50 degrees or below. We may have some incidences of just the gas leaking off if we don't get a good seal. They need to really keep an eye on that. And we're not worried about too much water right now, but our soil temperature is still pretty warm too. But, folks that are cover cropping are thinking about it. One of the agents has said we've flown on our seed, but it's still sitting because it hasn't rained in almost a month. Just be patient and use good judgment, get good advice, get it from more than one source, like we do with everything else, we hope anyway. But that fall planting is kind of ground down a little bit. heading into the spring. I know folks are thinking about this fall some herbicide, some weed control to keep the winter's annuals down and control some of those hard to control weeds in the spring, like the mare's tail that can get started and which are much more easily killed in the fall. But again, the weeds need to be actively growing and able to absorb the herbicide so it can kill them. Generally, we can still do a pretty good job, but it may not look like much is happening, but you will know you did it. But I think prepping for next spring, you need to have your plans made and follow through with them as best as you can. Give yourself a chance to pivot and move a different direction if you need to, or sideways a little bit. But, have that plan and stick to it as best you can.
With the prospects for a dry winter, maybe then a dry spring coming on, should we be looking at seeding rates and hybrid selection? Does that come into play as well?
Well, that will, and one of the things you brought up there, it just reminded me, Lucas was talking about it, Dr. Haig out at Colby. If we're doing some seeding or such this fall, even a light turbo tilling or something like that, where we're cutting that residue up, it will blow. It will still blow even if there's residue out there, especially if it's in smaller pieces. So we were already seeing a little bit of blowing going on, and Mary Knapp, our climatologist, was on this morning, and it is predicted to be a drier winter. We get some wind, and we can see some soil move, so we really don't want to uncover that if we don't have to. But no, as you're planning ahead, I think you plan for whatever a normal year is, and in 41 professional ones of them, I haven't, not sure really what a normal one is yet, Jeff. But it's, you go with the norm, you plan for success. There will be newer, some of the drought tolerant, the hybrids, especially in corn, are good. This year, we had a lot more folks plant sorghum than I think really planned to, but kind of hit a home run with it because they generally, for the sorghum, in the sorghum part of the state, it has been overall tremendous. So, and the price on the sorghum has been really good, the difference between it and corn. So that was a good decision. Some guys were planting it, some were forced into it. You might consider planting dates. We need to get that stuff out of the ground, but it will rain sometime, and you don't know when it's going to stop. We've seen that happen before, too. So plan as normal and be ready to pivot and go when you need to.
That's Northeast Area Extension agronomist Stu Duncan with an update on crop conditions across the state and available options for gaining an edge for what's projected to be a dry winter and spring. And to stay up to date on the latest agronomy news and research, subscribe to the weekly K-State Department of Agronomy e-Update newsletter at eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. And to listen to the podcast version of Agriculture Today, visit agtoday.net, agtoday.net, or using an app on your mobile device, type these search keywords, Agriculture, Today, Kansas, and you'll find this program. By tapping the subscribe button, brand new episodes of Agriculture Today will automatically arrive on your device. That's agtoday.net. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wickman. In today's agricultural news, this was a good week for corn and soybean crop development. Stephanie Ho has more with USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey.
Wide open weather helped with crop progress in most parts of the country.
Producers are starting to make the move from soybeans to corn as the open weather continues. And we saw 19% of the U.S. corn harvested just in the last week. 52% of the corn harvested in the last 4 weeks.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey has the latest numbers for corn.
60% harvested by October 18th, far ahead of the 5-year average of 43% and more than twice last year's pace when just 28% of the corn had been harvested by October 18th.
97% of the nation's corn is mature, which is the same number for the percentage of soybeans that are dropping leaves.
The soybean harvest did not outpace corn this week. We saw a 14% advance in the soybean harvest progress to reach 75% overall.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Rippey also has some details of the nation's corn harvest progress.
We saw harvest progress during the week ranging from 20 to 30% in a large number of Midwestern states that includes Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, and the Dakotas. North Dakota made the biggest advance during the week, going from 25 to 55% harvested for a 30-point increase just in the last week. Now, looking at the corn condition, 61% good to excellent is the final number, 14% very poor to poor, and we will finish 2020 with a better rated crop than this time a year ago when we were looking at 56% good to excellent and 14% very poor to poor. It's worth noting that some of the worst corn conditions are on the fringes of the Corn Belt. Moving out into the Great Plains, Colorado, where drought has been a big story this year, 48% of the corn rated very poor to poor. But don't forget that we did have a drought that extended into the Western Corn Belt, and our season-ending condition showing up at 24% very poor to poor in Iowa, as well as 19% in Nebraska and Kansas.
Taking a look at the Kansas crop progress and condition report from the National Agricultural Statistics Service for the week ending October 18th. Field crops winter wheat condition rated 7% very poor, 17% poor, 45% fair, 28% good, and 3% excellent. Winter wheat planted was 84%, ahead of 73% last year and 70% for the 5-year average. Emerged was 61%, ahead of 46% both last year and average. Corn harvested was 76%, ahead of 58% last year and the 69% average. Soybean condition rated 3% very poor, 10% poor, 32% fair, 46% good, and 9% excellent. Soybeans dropping leaves was 95%. That's ahead of 90% last year and near the 91% average. Harvested was 64%, well ahead of 27% last year and the 35% average. Sorghum condition rated 3% very poor, 10% poor, 29% fair, 45% good, and 13% excellent. Sorghum mature was 95%, ahead of 84% last year and the 86% average. Harvested was 49%, well ahead of 24% last year and ahead of the 32% average. Cotton condition rated 3% very poor, 12% poor, 40% fair, 40% good, and 5% excellent. Cotton bolls opening was 88%, near 89% last year, but ahead of the 79% average. Harvested was 6%, near 3% last year, and equal to average. Sunflowers harvested was 38%, ahead of 24% last year, and the 22% average. Pasture and range report. Pasture and range conditions rated 11% very poor, 23% poor, 39% fair, 25% good, and 2% excellent. Well, damage estimates from a rare windstorm that slammed Iowa and some other parts of the Midwest in August are growing, with a total now at $7.5 billion, according to a new report. The August 10th storm hit Iowa hard, but also caused damage in Illinois, Ohio, Minnesota, and Indiana. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration said that it's currently the second costliest U.S. disaster so far in 2020. Although cost estimates for widespread wildfires along the West Coast aren't yet available. The storm generated winds of up to 140 miles per hour that flattened millions of acres of crops. It also knocked out power to 500,000 Iowa residents and damaged homes, trees, and power lines. 4 people died as the storm moved across the Midwest. The most expensive disaster so far this year was Hurricane Laura, which cost $14 billion in damage when it hit the Gulf Coast in August. The U.S. Agriculture Department has estimated that Iowa farmers will be unable to harvest at least 850,000 acres of crops this fall because of the heavy storm damage. And finally, in agricultural news, this reminder, Kansas State University will soon be hosting its annual K-State Swine Day. Because of the pandemic, this year's edition will be held virtually over the mornings of November 18th and 19th. Despite being conducted online, it will still provide swine producers with lots of valuable information. K-State swine specialist Mike Tokash says that this year's Swine Day will revolve around two themes: applied swine nutrition and feed processing and safety. He talks about what's being offered on the nutrition side.
We're going to start the program off with Jason Woodworth highlighting the research that's been done over the last few years to summarize that whole area about how we feed sows immediately before farrowing, trying to reduce stillbirth rate and to improve survivability of the piglets shortly after birth. We're going to tie a bow around that whole area and help producers understand exactly how they should feed sows during that period.
Tokash will follow up with a look at minimizing pig nutrient issues at weaning time.
We know that pigs go through a period of time right after weaning where they don't want to eat very much feed, and that leads to a lot of problems for us in the nursery, and it ties not only to mortality, but morbidity, and some of the reduced pig performance that we see. And so I'm going to summarize the research that's been done not only at Kansas State, but around the world that is focused on what we can do in the farrowing house, and then also what we can do after weaning to try to increase feed intake of those pigs in the early nursery, and again, focusing on how do we reduce mortality in that important time period.
That's K-State swine specialist Mike Tokash with a small sampling of the information that will be covered during K-State's 2020 Swine Day, November 18th and 19th. The program is free, and producers can go to www.ksuswine.org for registration information and to register. And that's a look at today's agricultural news. Agriculture Today continues after the break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
This is Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.
Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
Now my friend had a problem, but he and his wife were up to a challenge.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
It all began when the cat Mick, or it could have been Mac, the other cat, brought this small object into the house and started to play with it like a cat and mouse game. The cat tossing the object into the air and letting it drop on the rug. Then, with its paws, boxing it. It was alive, but only barely. My friend thought that the cat had brought in a rat into the house. At first, it did look like a rat. Then, when my friend looked in disgust, he realized that it was not a rat, but indeed a live animal, a young animal, a red squirrel. Its eyes were not yet open, but it had all the parts a squirrel is supposed to have, including the very important bushy tail. He picked the tiny animal up, and after looking it over carefully, did not see any gashes or broken bones, only a broken-off toenail and slight puncture marks where the cat Mick, or it might have been Mac, had held the tiny squirrel and brought it into the house. The cats do go into the woods and have a ball, and it is no surprise that the squirrel was brought in. It might have fallen out of its den or nest. If it did, then it made a long drop, as most squirrels' nests are way up. It's also possible that the cat climbed higher and higher, found a nest with the litter, picked one up and took it home. However, the first scenario is probably more like it. The tiny squirrel crawled to the edge, lost its balance, and tumbled down. The cat, stalking in the woods, saw movement and took it home. Now, my friend had a problem, but he and his wife were up to a challenge. They had some condensed milk and prepared a mix they thought would be good for a squirrel, and drop by drop fed some of it into the parched lips. The tiny squirrel was not too far from premature death. The next thing my friend did was place the little creature inside an old, clean sock, and placed the sock with the squirrel inside his shirt. It didn't take long for the squirrel to know he was home, hearing the steady heartbeat of my friend. We all watched the squirrel grow. When visiting my friend, he would carefully bring the sock out and very carefully shake out the growing squirrel. By now, the squirrel had opened his eyes, and when out of the sock would climb all over my friend, as if my friend was a tree. There came a day that he realized the no longer so tiny animal needed another environment. And after contacting the veterinary science department, it was decided that Squirrelissimo, as I like to call him, would go there and live with another young squirrel which had been found on campus. Apparently more squirrels fall out of their nests. When my friend brought the adopted squirrel, the first thing they told him, "Oh, he's way too fat. What did you feed him?" Squirrelissimo continued to make great progress in his new environment, and the companionship of the other squirrel was good. They quickly became buddies while playing in their cage. But you shouldn't keep wild animals in cages, and the time had come to release them. It had been decided, when that time came, they would be released in the woods around my friend's home. A good place with plenty of trees, oak trees. It is natural habitat. Only this time it could help if a nest box was made for the critters just in case. My friend called me. Could I make the box? I made the box following instructions so the dimensions would be just right. I dropped it off at my friend's place and he secured it in the tree, an oak tree he chose as the new home for the two abandoned waifs. The day of release was a perfect fall day with fallen leaves covering the forest floor. I was not at the release, but when I did go and look, both squirrels had become real squirrels again, climbing, chasing, sitting, nibbling, doing the squirrely thing. They enjoyed their space, their freedom. They were not afraid. Curiously, they came to the tip of the branches to look at us, while we sat very quietly near their den tree. I wondered if they had gone into the nest which I had made. With the still warm weather, little need for shelter. My friend had fixed a food platform near the base of the tree in a natural crotch, and the apples were appreciated. Of course, the hope is that they stay around and that for a while one can identify that squirrel, which was saved from the playful cat and the other adopted one. But even if nature takes over, for now you know you made a difference. There are hawks flying overhead, and there are bobcats cruising the woods. They have to learn to scamper and play it safe. They have a great woodlot, ravine, with plenty of oaks and other mast-bearing trees. And remembering the squirrels in the feeders next to the house, they should do well for themselves. When my friend put up the nest box, he selected a tree as far away from other squirrels, but close to their home. It's going to be interesting to see how it all works out. Squirrels are very territorial. Just think about all the scolding you hear when entering the woods if and when a squirrel observes you. And they always do. However, these two better be nice, as after all, both were saved when they could not even see. Just imagine one of those scolding you when you look for mushrooms. Their mushrooms.
Gus van der Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas.
And that'll do it for today's edition of Agriculture Today. Be sure and join us again tomorrow. I'm Jeff Wickman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.